Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia and today I'm reviewing Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier. This book was published in 1941 and it was actually the novel that was published immediately after Daphne du Maurier's most popular novel, Rebecca. I went into this book without really knowing what it was about. I knew it was about pirates, but other than that I had absolutely zero idea of what was expecting me with this, and I can say that this book surprised me quite a bit. When I say I went into it entirely without expectations, that's not entirely true. I had previously read two other novels by Daphne du Maurier, Rebecca and Jamaica Inn, and so I had some expectations of a sort of creepy, dark vibe, some twists and turns, some unexpected dark things happening. What I wasn't expecting and what I got instead was an escapist fantasy romance about a sexy French pirate. Am I mad about this? Am I disappointed? No, not at all. I had a great time reading this, so let me tell you about Frenchman's Creek. The story is set sometime in the 17th century, I believe, and it follows an unhappy aristocrat named Donna Lady St. Column, who at the beginning of the book is running away from her life in London, sitting in a carriage, speeding off into Cornwall, where she wants to spend some time on her husband's country estate. So right at the beginning of the book you get this idea of a very unhappy person, a really vivid image of someone quite literally running away from their life. And in the course of that you also get the idea that our protagonist Donna is, generally speaking, quite unlikable, very impulsive, very rude. Her servants are terrified of her, her children seem to prefer the nanny. Not someone who you immediately root for, but very quickly it becomes clear why she is like that, and that it's all born from her sense of dissatisfaction, of a sort of self-loathing, a dislike of who she is and who she's become, and an idea that that's not really her, and that running away from London will enable her to find the person that she wants to be. This sounds all very esoteric, but there is a lot of that unhappiness that really jumps at you from the very first descriptions of her. So this rich, spoiled, erratic, impulsive woman arrives at the countryside estate of Navron in Cornwall on the coast, and it's such a classic Daphne du Maurier setting. It's moody, it's dark, it has a sort of sense of danger about it, a wilderness that you as the reader and Donna as the protagonist are immediately drawn to. And pretty much as soon as she arrives, she starts to relax. She revels in the freedom of not just being without her husband, but also without those societal constraints that made her so unhappy in London. And again, the setting of this house is classic Daphne du Maurier. You even have the, not creepy in this case, but you have a manservant with a secret. His name is William and I adore him. I could genuinely go on a whole tangent about William. Just want to mention here how much he and other side characters are just absolutely perfectly described and placed in this book. The minor characters, the villains, even the characters that are right on the edges of the narrative, that maybe appear once or twice, or that aren't described in details, are so much fun. They're unique, they're wonderful, there's a real playfulness in how they're described. The author takes these very common character tropes, like, for example, the servant with a lot of power and a secret, or the uptight pompous neighbour, or the neglectful husband. She takes these tropes and just really just revels in them, explores the tropes, has a lot of fun with them, and I really enjoyed that. I like a book where it's not just the protagonists that are well fleshed out, but where you get a sense of everyone around them as well, even down to the children of the main character, who really are more plot devices than characters. You still get a sense of their personalities. Anyway, we get back to that classic Daphne du Maurier creepiness when Donna arrives at Navron, the countryside estate that is wild and abandoned on the coast of Cornwall. And there are rumours of pirates in the area that she's immediately warned about and sort of made to fear, but because this protagonist is a romantic heroine, instead she goes to investigate. And what she finds is not danger and not horror, but instead a sexy French pirate. And very quickly this book turns into a straight up romance. I'd like to take a moment to just appreciate the horrendousness of this cover design. It's so 70s, it's glorious. Someone got the brief Sexy French Pirate and this is what they came up with. Wonderful. From 1972. So this Sexy French Pirate, and you might be thinking I'm being very disrespectful to the poor man by describing him and referring to him as such, but this book genuinely only ever calls him the Frenchman. So I think by giving him another adjective, I'm actually doing him a lot of good there, giving him real credit. He's not just French, he's not just a pirate, he's also hot. That's all you need to know about him. He's just your typical romantic hero. He's everything Donna needs at this point. He exemplifies danger, but he also exemplifies a respect that she hasn't known from her husband, and he also exemplifies, most of all, adventure and freedom. He sweeps Donna off her feet and introduces her to this life of adventure that she absolutely takes to and loves and enjoys to the fullest in the course of this book. I don't need to spoil the plot here, but you can imagine it. There are elements of danger, of course, because the pirate life is not for everyone. There's a lot of adventure, there's a lot of wistfulness and melancholy, and it's those darker elements that I think add an amount of intrigue and interest to what would otherwise be a very straightforward book. One such serious issue that is quite surprisingly made a topic, a theme of the book, is the question of motherhood. I found that very interesting because you get a real sense that Donna would never have chosen to become a mother, but because she didn't have a choice and she has these two children that pretty much throughout the book they are there because she's taking them with them, but they are not in the foreground. She has the nanny to look after them, she has the servants to look after them. You don't really get a real sense of her attachment to her children as people, and that is something that's not just subtext, but that's actually talked about in the story itself. She talks about her children and the responsibilities that come with parenthood with the Sexy French Pirate. There's a really interesting discussion between them about that. And in the end, the presence of those children does matter in the choices that Donna makes. The husband is also an interesting character because we don't really see him in person on the page until the last, I think, quarter, or the last fifth, the last plot point of the book. Mostly we see him as a bad memory, as Donna reflecting on him, comparing the Sexy French Pirate to him, of course, and on her own mistakes in her relationship with him. And you get the idea of a very ridiculous man, a very pompous, upper-class type that doesn't take anything really seriously and that doesn't fall for her attempts to provoke him, which she does. She's by no means a sort of quietly suffering wife. She's, like I've said, described as a very erratic, impulsive person who puts herself in the limelight, who doesn't want to disappear behind her husband. But you don't get a real sense of how he treats her until he actually shows up. That was an interesting twist because it shows you just how expertly Daphne du Maurier writes these characters, in that you first meet someone like him through the perception of the main character and then you meet him on the actual page, and the difference between those two is quite stark. So the book does have some darker turns and some heavy topics that are discussed and some danger and some tension, but for the most part it is, as I've said, an escapist romantic fantasy. And that was just weirdly liberating to read, especially as I kept expecting horrible things to happen. I was expecting the tragedy, the horror, the darkness that I know from Daphne du Maurier. It was a very interesting reading experience, and I'm sure you'll have a slightly different reading experience if you read the book after seeing this video, because I'm telling you now that this reads very different to something like Rebecca. One of the main reasons why I love this book so much is because you get a real sense that the author had an absolute blast writing it. She must have had so much fun with the creation of these characters and this story. She must have just had a wonderful time writing this. And you can tell because this book strikes a real balance between not taking itself too seriously, between acknowledging the absurdity of a pirate romance set in the 1600s in Cornwall with a sexy French pirate who's pretty much just there to afford the main character an escape from her unhappiness. That is a silly and absurd and fun idea, and the author has fun with it. And like I said, the book doesn't take itself too seriously in that regard. But then it also weaves in these hints of realism and of relatability from topics that I frankly wasn't expecting in a novel from 1941, such as the trappings of motherhood, the burden of responsibility. These issues that are touched upon are real, and the author treats them with the respect they deserve, and the book strikes a real balancing act between those aspects and does that very well. So I would recommend you give Frenchman's Creek a go if you are after a mostly light-hearted and very fun read that still has a little more weight to it than you might first expect, even after hearing this review of it. If you are not a reader of romance, still give this a go. I am not a reader of romance, so that's something I'm trying to change, and I enjoyed this immensely. If you like any of Daphne du Maurier's other books, this is very different, but it's still recognisably her. If you were to write a Daphne du Maurier checklist that includes things like creepy Cornwall countryside setting or heroine who feels entirely out of time and place, then this will check quite a few of those boxes. It's an incredibly fun read. I'm glad this was recommended to me, and I'm passing the recommendation on to you. If you have this book on your TBR or if you're interested in it, do give this a go. Let me know if you've read this and if the book surprised you as much as it did me, or if you went into it knowing exactly what you were going to find. And also give me recommendations for what Daphne du Maurier book I should read next. I've so far read Rebecca and I've read Jamaica Inn, and for Jamaica Inn I've also recorded a review video which I'll link in the description box. Thank you for watching. Bye!